Mike is an educator, historian, and historic preservationist, and has for many years passionately collected photographs, documented local history, and delved into multiple facets of Lebanon County's history. He is a graduate of Millersville University with a Bachelor of Science degree in elementary education and of Lebanon Valley College with a master's degree in science education. A teacher at the Cornwall Lebanon School District, Michael also serves as the vice president of the Friends of the Cornwall Iron Furnace, and he is on the boards of both the Lebanon County Historical Society and the Lebanon County Historic Preservation Trust. He has co-authored a historic guide of the Mount Lebanon Cemetery, a calendar highlighting the life of Robert H. Coleman, the Colemans, Lebanon's royal family, and a driving tour of Lebanon County. Most recently, he co-authored a Lebanon County Conservancy tour map highlighting the Cornwall area and assisted with illustrating tales from a haunted valley, supernatural Lebanon County legends and poetry. Along with Sue Wetzel, Mike is continuing their book series, Communities of Cornwall, an historic tour. So please welcome our speaker, Mike Trump.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everybody. First, I'd like to thank the late C. Maury Erdman, who had served as on the Lebanon Water Authority Board for many years and a former Lebanon County Commissioner. I'll tell you more about him later. I'd also like to thank John Beers, Executive Director of the City of Lebanon Authority, who provided a comprehensive tour of the water supply tour to me on a very bitter cold January day 2 years ago, and clarification of bits of behind the scenes information. His wealth of knowledge of the water system is unsurpassed. John will be available later in the program to help answer those technical questions. I also like to thank the late G. Angelo, Nancy Gambler, and Francis Titzler, as well as Jack Kiskadden, Daniel Chernich, and Michael Bernard, who so graciously shared their wonderful collection of photographs to better tell this story. And I also like to thank Jeanette Laverty, who recently passed on to me some of her father's negatives of the water supply. Her father was the late J. Angelo. Of course, I'd like to thank Mike Emery, Cornwall Iron Furnace Site Administrator, for helping to assist making this program run a bit smoother. Kathy Donaldson, Treasurer of Cornwall Iron Furnace Associates, for technical assistance for this webinar, and along with Karen Mitchell, who both provided constructive feedback to pare down tonight's program. They know I'm very windy when I talk. And of course, the Cornwall Iron Furnace Associates for sponsoring the program. For many years, the only documented history of the water supply exists in a publication that was put out in 1905. It's very detailed, very comprehensive. And along with Water Board of Water notes that were bound, along with newspaper articles that just seem to go on from year to year. Great wealth of information. But it wasn't until I had accidentally uncovered a collection of panoramic pictures of the supply dams taken in the mid-1920s that would lead me to a lot more detailed and historical information about the water supply. This collection of photographs, now located in the Lebanon County Historical Society, led me directly to Mr. C. Maury Erdman. What a valuable resource he turned out to be for me. His wealth of knowledge helped to answer the numerous questions I had accumulated in my years of research. We both were curious to the extent of each other's research, and soon thereafter, we began sharing what each other had found and what mysteries were left unsolved. Needless to say, we both became fast friends. It is Mr. Erdman's extensive research that helped provide the foundation of this program. Tonight's program will take us from the Lebanon Valley, from the Lebanon water supply reservoirs near Rexmont, Lebanon County, to the pumping station near Brickerville, Lancaster County, noted by the stars in the lower portion of the map, and northward to Highbridge, also Christian E. Seacrest Reservoir near Sudburg, Schuylkill County, noted by the star at the top of the map. Located at the southern end of Lebanon County, there once stood three large impounded bodies of water, two neatly tucked into the foothills of the South Mountain. The other, located a short distance to the north, sprawled towards the Lebanon Valley. The site was commonly and locally referred to as the Rexmont supply dams. They were identified as such because of their location. The Rexmont dams never supplied their namesake with water, only tranquil beauty and splendid scenery. They are what remained of the city of Lebanon's first water supply. For nearly 3/4 of a century, the Rexmont supply dams provided an abundance of water to the once industrialized city of Lebanon, located about 6 miles to the north. In reality, the impounded reservoirs held more than millions of gallons of cool, refreshing water. They held a history that stretched beyond a century. Time had not always been so kind to these dams. Their life had been one of controversy, turbulence, and lots of headaches. Our journey will take us from the foothills of the South Mountain to a place northward through the Great Valley and into a gap within the Blue Mountains located in the southern portion of the neighboring county of Schuylkill called Second Mountain. By an act of General Assembly dated February 20, 1821, the town of Lebanon became a borough. It was to be governed by a borough council consisting of a chief burgess, an assistant chief burgess, and 6 council members. Council was to meet quarterly, and their duties were broadly defined in Section 9, which reads in part, and I quote, "To accomplish the conveyance and distribution of a sufficient quantity of good and wholesome water to and through the borough, and its permanent continuance for the accommodation of its inhabitants. To carry out this program, the charter permitted council to levy taxes not to exceed 1 cent on the dollar of appraised value of real estate." Slowly, the borough of Lebanon grew beyond its initial boundaries of slightly under 265 acres. 5 adjacent townships and or boroughs would eventually elect to join the borough of Lebanon, and 48 years would pass, 1869, before council would address the issue of providing wholesome water to and through the growing borough. The question of a public water supply for the borough of Lebanon was resolved on March 15, 1869. 449 voters voted in favor of a public water system. 69 voters opposed. The General Assembly approved an act to permit the borough of Lebanon to borrow $30,000 to pay off the borough's debt. County commissioners were authorized to sell bonds worth $25,000, with the proceeds specifically dedicated for the purchase of borough water bonds. Water sources were next explored. Of the many sources, it was then unclear which would be useful to build an adequate water system. Many favored the Swatara Creek. However, others favored a source located at the South Mountains. Some favored wells in the vicinity of Walnut and 12th Streets near the Cornwall Railroad. Here it was believed that pumping water from the streams of the Hazel Dike would satisfy community needs. Studies were made by 2 highly respected local civil engineers, namely L.R. Heinecke, who was superintendent of the Union Canal Company, and W. Lorenz. Heinecke favored a gravity supply from the headwaters of the Hammer Creek. Lorenz favored pumping water from the Schnitz Creek to a reservoir. Borough Council further invited H.P.M. Birkenbein of Philadelphia to conduct a complete investigation. Birkenbein's extensive field work involved nearly 50 miles of travel. His lengthy report included the consideration of Union Canal's reservoir at Stover's Dam, the Brandywine Creek, and an abandoned canal feeder. However, Birkenbein discarded these in favor of one of 4 other possibilities, these being Little Swatara, Schnitz Creek, and the Quittapahilla, all requiring pumping, and the South Mountain area where gravity would negate the expense of pumping water. Birkenbein's report gave the following. Little Swatara could be dammed at Horseshoe Bend near Stover's Mill. It was the closest approach to the borough. However, the steam engines would have to pump intake water 220 feet high to pass over the gravel hill into a reservoir that would have to be built at 8th Street near the railroad. The Quittapahilla source posed different problems. Its origins, 2 springs 360 feet apart, had been in current use by the Union Canal Company for a dam east of the city. Its use would require purchase of the dam and a plan to divert water into a reservoir. The Schnitz Creek required getting control of Zinn's Mill, diverting road and barnyard runoff, and constructing impounding ponds to prevent damage to the pumps. In consideration was the unpredictable future activity at the Cornwall ore mines, which had an effect at this site. If the South Mountain was chosen, then the borough would need to acquire horse mill lands and install a reservoir. Of primary importance for a water supply was demand, present and future. With the idea of an increased industrial and residential use, it was agreed that a 3 million gallons a day use was realistic. The contract was eventually awarded to D.F. Minihan of Hanford at a cost of $152,000. Birkenbein was chosen as chief engineer. Henry Horst conveyed to the borough 24 acres and 32 purchase of land and a sawmill for the consideration of about $6,000. Samuel Horst owned an adjacent tract of land, and at the consideration of nearly $10,000, he conveyed to the borough a grist mill and certain water courses and rights. The final cost of construction would be $198,000. This included construction of the storage reservoir, aqueduct, distributing reservoir, supply and street mains, and fire hydrants. Work began in 1871 and was completed by late summer the following year. The embankment for the new reservoir, composed of earth and rock and puddled with clay, impounded about 18 million gallons of water. Water began to flow to Lebanon on September 13, 1872, but a break in the 16-inch main forced the shutdown, so the actual date became September 15th. The arrival of water was heralded by a workman on the line named Michael Norton. On the morning when the water first flowed through the line of pipe, Norton was stationed at the valve on South 8th Street. Hearing the water in its maddening frenzy rushing through the pipes, Norton left his post and ran along 8th Street, wildly shouting in his heavy Irish accent that the water was here. On September 20th, 1872, the borough celebrated the completion of the water supply with speeches from borough officials on the county's courthouse steps. A parade with bands from the Perseverance and Union Fire Companies, in addition to fire equipment from the Hook and Ladder, Perseverance, and Union Fire Companies, assisted in the celebration. At the conclusion of these ceremonies, the hydrant at 8th and Cumberland Street was tested to show 65 pounds of pressure. A 1.5-inch nozzle sprayed water over the top of the county courthouse steeple. This particular slide is not of the event, of course. However, it does show the impressive amount of pressured water that could be used. This photograph shows the demonstration of pumping water over the 168-foot steeple of St. John's Reformed Church, located on the north side of Willow Street, near 10th Street. In 1872, council established its first rules and regulations. Here's a listing of some of the restrictions. No person was permitted to tap on without a permit. Service applications cost $2. Service pipes were to be maintained in good shape and be protected from frost by the customer, who was responsible to prevent unnecessary waste. A disagreement between the water board and council resulted when the board chose a water superintendent and passed the name to council for confirmation. Council rejected the choice and named its own person on grounds that the selection was council's prerogative, not the water board's. The entire water board resigned. During its inaugural year of operation, the first applicant approved for connections was W. Howard Hope for property at 40 North 5th Street. There were 106 permits issued that same year. It was also decided that houses were to be numbered. 1872 had been a festive year, one with pride in what had been accomplished. However, the following year presented endless problems. Complaints of muddy and discolored water were reported, and upon the inspection, the directors found the dam in filthy conditions. A leak was puddled, but persisted. Cleanup began, but was unable to be completed when freezing weather arrived and halted to work. There had been no experience in readying the system for winter. The packing of hydrants and valves with snow to prevent frost damage proved inadequate, and frozen hydrants were numerous. Every major street throughout the borough was torn up during installation of water mains. The main water lines in many streets were too close to the surface. Some froze and necessitated raising the street level. In 1884, a 16-inch main broke and left the town without water for 2.5 days. Muskrats infested the dam and were ruining the breast. The superintendent was instructed to use all possible means to exterminate them. Work continued on the north slope or the outside of the dam, but when the leak was found and corrected, another appeared. Water was in poor condition and a drought prevailed. Requests for water service exceeded beyond the borough's limits. Water supply was at an all-time low, resulting in the north side of town receiving little or no water, and much of the impounded water was either tainted, evaporated, or leaked out. Contamination had been traced to dead leaves, roots, and stumps in the dam, and sawdust from the abandoned mill uphill from the dam washed into the water supply every time it rained. Leaks in the dam were finally pinpointed to its northern face built of porous limestone, of which have never been included in its construction in the first place. The original policy decision to limit expansion returned to haunt them when influential heirs of Robert W. Coleman requested an extension from 12th Street to Donamore Furnace and later to Colebrook Furnace. Officials agreed to the extension. Council, in spite of efforts towards orderly growth, were being pushed and pulled in directions which they had not contemplated in their budgets or plans. By 1882, a joint committee consisting of 3 citizens, 3 members of the council, and the water board met and completed a report. Their report addressed 9 problem areas, but focused mainly on the reservoir, the water mains running into town, and sources of distribution. They noted that there had been some deficiency in the construction of the dam. A year later, it was agreed that a new dam would be built across the road from the current water supply reservoir and within the deep ravine called the Hammer Creek Gap. A. Harvey Tyson, an engineer from Reading, was retained to draw up the plans, and a contract was awarded to William Call, also of Reading. At a final cost of $18,000, dam number 2 was completed by 1884. This new dam impounded about 13 million gallons of water. 1886 brought both good and bad news. Lebanon became a third-class city. A commission of 4 members replaced the water board, and mains were to extend beyond the city's limits. Then, in October, the board reported that the water supply was in precarious condition. The 2 reservoirs were nearly empty, and the only water supply was from the streams flowing into them. After several years of studies and reports that had been compiled, namely the 2 Tyson reports and the Ludlow report, both in 1887, Cassin's report in 1889, and a public statement from Mayor Peter L. Weimer, Council finally agreed to build an additional impounding dam on the west branch of the Hammer Creek, located in the ravine west of dam number 2. On February 24th, 1891, William Call, the same contractor who built dam number 2, was awarded the contract for a submission of a low bid of $16,990. This new dam impounded 30 million gallons of water. This new supply did not come without problems. Within a year, it was reported to be nearly empty and leaking in the valve chamber and outlet pipe. In addition, springs were soon discovered to be rising from the lower base of the dam's breast. Council proposed building a pump plant and running a 20-inch main 9,200 feet in length from Poplar Run, located in Elizabeth Township, Lancaster County, to Red Bridge near dam number 2 in Lebanon County. In early 1901, Hallman Brothers were awarded the contract at a cost of nearly $38,000. With much opposition, a steam-powered pumping engine was eventually acquired from the Snow Pump Company. By September of 1902, and after a few tests, the unit proved to be entirely satisfactory. The steam-powered pump was housed in this impressive sandstone structure. This view of the dam and spillway across Hammer Creek at pumping station shows how it looked in the early years of the 20th century. In 1911, a caretaker's house was constructed at pumping station. For many years, George D. Getz and his wife, Cora, resided here, raising their 6 children. In addition, a water intake structure was constructed adjacent to the main sandstone pump house. Also called a receiving well, both Poplar Run and Hammer Creek were piped into this well and then pumped into the main pumping station. The Getz children can be seen posing for their picture in front of the receiving well. A sluice gate can be seen behind the children sitting in the wagon. I'll move my cursor over to there, right here. A series of these gates controlled the amount of water flowing into the dam at Poplar Run. Near the supply dams at Rexmont, a caretaker's home was also constructed to house the keeper of the dams and his family. The structure was located on the north side of Rexmont Road and west of dam number 1. Keeper Samuel D. Watson and his children are seen in this early 20th century photograph. This 1895 map is the only known map that I've ever seen that survives that shows all 3 supply dams near Rexmont. On July 6, 1903, Council reported that the main lines to the city were no longer adequate. Millions of gallons of water were gone to waste. The city was using 1.5 million gallons of water a day. and more appliances were being attached to the system. In addition to low water pressure experienced at high elevations, such as the residents in Hathaway and Berwyn Parks, and a debt of 225,000 existed. Council first rejected the plan of adding a new 20-inch pipeline to supplement the existing 12 and 16-inch lines to the city. However, by 1910, this line, consisting of 30,000 feet, was finally installed. With the 20-inch main in service, matters began to run more smoothly. In 1905, reports show that the pumping station was not needed the entire year. The 3 supply reservoirs near Rexmont were all functioning quite well, except that algae accumulated on the surface of the impounded water. By towing copper sulfate bags behind a small boat, the algae was destroyed, but left a scum like soapy water on the water surface. By 1913, there were 5,570 taps into the system. Rate increases provided a more spendable income than any other time in the department's history. When the board asked for a second pump as a backup for Hammer Creek, the appropriation received unanimous approval, and the state ordered the installation of automatic feeds for chlorination and lime. The city was growing rapidly by birth, immigration, and annexation. Annexation was the speedy way to draw in more taxables. East Lebanon Borough, the area south of Walnut between 7th and 6th Streets, was annexed, as well as other small neighborhoods from North Cornwall, South Lebanon, and North Lebanon townships. The annexation of these areas did not come without problems. The citizens of these newly acquired tracts of land requested water hookups as well as improvements to their streets. Letham Steel Company would assist in meeting some of these needs. Amidst all this change and turmoil, the city began to rename streets. Front Street became Lincoln Avenue, Schaeferstown Road became Pershing Avenue, and Campbelltown Road became Oak Street. World War I escalated prices, materials grew scarce, and men going to military service or exchanging city jobs for better paying ones in heavy industry disrupted labor forces. The city coped well with all these situations, and he still had some unallocated borrowing capacity, but not nearly enough because, once again, Lebanon was running out of water. In March of 1920, the city hired a New York firm to audit water accounts. They were to recommend a means to finance a waterworks on the Swatara. In conclusion, the firm suggested that the city patch up and hold Hammer Creek and the Rexmont reservoirs and do nothing until such a time when the debt was reduced to undertake such a large new project. The 1920s brought an abundance of headaches for the new city engineer. One of his first tasks was to thoroughly inspect the water department's facility. At Hammer Creek, he suggested raising the impoundment 2.5 feet to increase the storage to 2.5 million gallons a day. This would also necessitate raising the breast of a small dam at Poplar Run about 1.5 feet. Council agreed. The city engineer was hampered in the spring of 1923 with heavy rains, but he managed to breach the old dam and place a reinforcement wall for the higher elevation. While on the job, the caretaker at pumping station became greatly alarmed with another situation, and he hesitated to report to council. The pump room was lit by kerosene lamps suspended from wooden rafters. In addition, the floor of the room was oil soaked. If a lamp exploded, the entire plant would be demolished. So the caretaker urged that lighting be immediately changed to electricity furnished by a water-powered generator or by batteries. Because the increasing cost of coal, an earlier study had been made to determine the difference in cost between the usage of coal and electricity. The savings at that time did not justify replacing steam boilers with electric motors. Now the engineer found, due to their deteriorated condition, both steam boilers were needed to operate a single pump. If a severe drought was encountered, both pumps would need to be operating simultaneously. The engineer urged that council undertake a study to electrify the entire plant. The mayor also urged for a study for the replacement of another dam in a ravine west of dam number 3, a fourth dam, and to replace steam power with electricity at Hammer Creek. The switch from steam power to an electric system was finally approved in April of 1925 at a cost of $8,000. The project included the purchase of a generator and wiring for electric lights at Hammer Creek. Lights would be placed in the pumping station structure as well as in each of the rooms of the keeper's house. Pumping station became the state's first electrified pumping station. The proposed fourth dam was never built west of dam number 3 near Rexmont. Despite troubling times, the beautiful and well-maintained grounds of Pumping Station became a popular place for picnics and other such gatherings. The water supply properties were often a place of destination for hikers, as seen in this view of a group from Lebanon's hiking club, posing for the photographer in front of the receiving well and pumping station structure. Folks could often be seen gathering bouquets of trailing arbutus and mountain laurel that grew in abundance throughout the mountainside. Here's a picture looking upstream along Hammer Creek. On Saturday, July 25th, 1925, encampment at Mount Gretna was in full operation. The Cornwall Methodist Church and Sunday School were enjoying a picnic at Penryn Park, located on the boundary between Lebanon and Lancaster counties. At about noon that day, clouds began to thicken and suddenly a severe thunderstorm broke. An unusual heavy downpour continued all afternoon. Only a week before, 12 soldiers were hurt by a storm that lasted through Mount Gretna. This particular storm was developing more rapidly and more severely. Thomas Walters, keeper at the Rexmont dams, related to the Lebanon Daily News that torrents of water raced down the South Mountains to the 3 dams. All spillways were filled to capacity, and dams number 2 and 3 were sending their overflow to number 1. For a time, number 1 managed to hold, but gradually the dam overflowed and began to erode the earthen breast. Walters checked the other 2 dams, and both were beginning to spill over their breasts as well. At first, a small crease was worn into the top of dam number 3. Over a short amount of time, the top of the dam widened and grew deeper. Walters quickly headed back to his home slightly north of the dam. He heard a sickening roar, knowing dam number 3 was ready to collapse. He retrieved his wife, children, and parents to higher ground. The home was untouched when the entire breast of the dam collapsed and emptied over 20 million gallons of water into the lower reservoir. The roaring mountain of mud and tons of water struck dam number 1 with intense velocity that it too collapsed. Dam number 2 was far from clear of danger, but was not affected by the overflow such as dam number 1 experienced. The valve chamber on the front face of the dam showed considerable fatigue and seepage, but by 5 p.m. the rains had stopped and the spillway gradually gained control. This is a picture showing dam number 1 and its breached breast, which is clearly here and right here. Telephone exchanges were alerted that a flood was imminent along the newly completed Hazel Dike. The city was warned of the danger rushing toward them. Their quick action saved lives, for there were no fatalities reported from the incident. The water rose so rapidly that the eastern end of the dike flooded far over its banks. Near South 6th Street, water was reported to be 3 feet deep in some of the home's first floor. The city engineer attempted to drive to the scene, but had to walk from Blanche Molly's Bluebird Tea House on the Cornwall Pike near Cornwall, since at that point, south, all of Cornwall Road was under mountains of mud and water. Other nearby roads had been badly damaged by fast-moving waters and washouts. A river of water from the mountainside created miniature Niagara Falls at Miners Village and quickly rushed into the ore pit, causing extensive washouts and flooding. The incline and hoist house at the Cornwall ore mines can be seen in the distance beyond the Cornwall Railroad's Miners Village passenger station, right here. At Pumping Station, the beautiful Hammer Creek grounds were badly damaged. The keeper's auto was washed downstream 2 miles. The boiler and pump rooms were standing in nearly 3 feet of water. The first floor of the engineer's home was also flooded to a depth of 3 feet. Recent work on the raising the impoundment on the Hammer Creek was undisturbed, but would require much cleaning and some small repairs. The Bethlehem Steel Company and Robizonia Furnace Company ore mines at Cornwall were filled with 60 feet of water, almost completely submerging the steam shovel derricks in water, thick mud, and other debris. If you look closely, you can see the derrick sticking out in the top photograph right here. In addition to buckets, picks, shovels, and wheelbarrows, The cars on the slopes of the Cornwall Ore Bank's incline were put into service to help remove the water, mud, and other debris from the pit. The storm, dubbed a cloudburst, was reported to be the worst storm in the history of the area. Operations at the ore mines would eventually resume as normal. Here you can see a before and after. So it gives you an idea how deep the water really was. An immediate plan was to rebuild number 1, abandon dam number 3, and build a new dam in the ravine west of dam number 3. In the end, however, temporary chlorinators were borrowed from a supplier and installed at the valve house of dam number 2. The dam was fed alum to settle out mud. Repairs would be made to the dams number 1 and 2. A new electric pump would be installed at the pumping station, and special officers were employed to keep all persons away from the area. Work was done by city employees and supervised by the city engineer. It was to be a faster and less costly method than accepting bids on the project. All workers were assigned to the South Mountain to clear debris and prepare for reconstruction. The next several views shows the repairs made to the dams. In this panoramic view of dam number 1, the coffer dam is visible on the far left, the repaired valve house in the center, and horse mill can be seen in the distance on the far right. Dam number 1 spillway, valve house, and chlorinator are clearly visible in this panoramic view taken shortly after its completion in 1926. The valve house at dam number 1, just above the chlorinator, can be seen peeking over the earthen impoundment, and its new spillway stretches off to the far left. Right here is the new spillway, and this is the valve house. Looking west, the raised dam breast at number 2 can be seen shortly after its completion in November of 1926. Dam number 3 was never rebuilt. Because of the abundance of growth that has reclaimed the area, it can barely be seen on the south side of Rexmont Road today. After a light snow has fallen, however, the cut in the former dam becomes quite visible. For many years, the site had been used as a shooting range for the City of Lebanon's police department. Here is the cut in the dam. The cloudburst of 25 marked the beginning of the end of the city's supply dams at Rexmont. In 1926, a telephone line was finally installed at Hammer Creek, thus eliminating the inefficiency of having to walk 2 miles to the nearest phone to report needs or an emergency. Acquisition for the house and land west of dam number 1 near Rexmont was purchased and retained as a new keeper's house. At a cost of almost $5,000, the house was enlarged to add a new kitchen and toilet facilities and replace the existing roof with a new metal one. Also, a corn crib, pigsty, chicken house, and a small barn for a horse, a cow, and an automobile were built. The former keeper's house was used as a storage supply for chemicals and equipment. It was eventually raised in the early 1970s. During the economic depression of the 1930s, springs located in the ravine of dam number 3 were routed to dam number 1. In 1934, it was reported that not a single new main was authorized. On July 19, 1935, council was granted a charter by an act of assembly for a new City of Lebanon authority. In 1936, the purchase of automatic chlorinators were installed to eliminate the former hand-operated ones. Ammonia feeds were added, and Depression-era government-funded labor, such as the WPA, or Works Public Administration, was used to build shelter and other structures needed to house the new equipment. Here's a Penn Pilot aerial view of the supply dams near Rexmont taken in 1940. This narrow band is Rexmont Road. In this direction, heading west would take you to Rexmont and eventually to Cornwall Furnace. This road eventually leads to 419. So here you can see Horse Mill, the lower reservoir, dam number 1, reservoir number 2, or what was known as the upper reservoir. And here's the site of the 3rd reservoir. Right here is the first caretaker's home, and they eventually relocated to a home right here. In 1938, the purchase of 6.7 acres of land near the supply dams from Laban and Nancy Wenger was purchased for $1,000. In addition, the Cornwall Estates offered for sale 604 additional acres for $5,900. The offer was promptly accepted. The water supply was solved for some time. The city, its distribution system, and its need for water continued to grow. By the late 1930s, it became apparent that a larger and better source of supply would have to be developed within a few years. Early 1943, interest to build a hospital for veterans of World War I and those returning home from World War II further pushed the need for a more abundant water supply. Immediate plans were started for water and sewer connections. The construction of the Lebanon Veterans Hospital was expected to begin in late November of 1944, with a completion date of December of 1945. Council urged VA officials to intercede the War Production Board to allow immediate construction of a new dam. Their plan worked, and plans moved forward to begin purchasing lands necessary for the new dam and reservoir. 2.5 years later, the VA hospital, with its 500-bed facility, was dedicated on May 12, 1947. The 575-acre complex tapped into an old 20-inch main water line that ran from Rexmont to the city of Lebanon. It also utilized additional water sources from natural springs located on site. This strip right here today is State Drive. Industrial activity by the war effort in the 1940s caused unusually heavy demands for the water system. Efforts were made during the war to establish the essential needs of a new water supply project, including a referendum on the 1944 November city election ballot for the passage of increasing the city debt by $1.5 million for the purpose of constructing a new dam. The election return showed 6,409 in favor and 730 opposed. Wartime restrictions were lifted so that bids could be taken as early as October 1945. The new source of supply would become known as the Fishing Creek Project. Despite its remote location, Highbridge, located in the southwestern corner of Schuylkill County and near the villages of Outwood and Sudburg, is rich in history. Historical evidence long gone suggested that Native Americans camped where the Fishing and Evening Creeks once merged to form Mill Creek. The Mill Creek Gap in Second Mountain presented a gateway to the wilderness area known as Stony Creek Valley and Jeff Swamp. With the ending of the war between France and England in the 1750s and the discovery of Schuylkill County's greatest holdings of coal, settlers poured through the gaps of the Blue Mountains into the present-day Pine Grove and Sudburg areas. Forests were cleared for farms, mills were erected along the Swatara and some of its tributaries, and the Union Canal Company would connect to the Pine Grove area. With the canal and its extension to Pine Grove in place, Dr. George N. Eckert, originally from Womelsdorf, built Swatara Furnace in 1830, just below the Mill Creek Gap in Second Mountain, to melt iron ore mined at Cornwall. The location was chosen for its vast supply of timber and water found in the mountainous area. The furnace was eventually converted into a forge and foundry. Swatara stoves, along with chains, were cast here. Production supposedly stopped abruptly when a flood in 1861 swept the Mill Creek dams away, despite surviving the devastating flood of 1850. Today, the old furnace stack and ironmaster's mansion remain. Located slightly north of the old Swatara furnace, once stood an engineering marvel of the mid-1800s known as Highbridge. The bridge was built to bring the railroad system closer to the coal workings in the almost impenetrable wilderness of western Schuylkill, northern Lebanon, and northwestern Dauphin counties. Two competitive railroad companies attempted to penetrate the wilderness with a rail line from the west at Dauphin and from the east at Auburn. Both efforts failed, though, so the two companies merged to form the Schuylkill and Susquehanna Railroad Company, subsequently connecting the railroads and, in the process, built Highbridge. This unique structure once allowed trains to run across the top of the bridge. The bridge's supporting timbers were protected from the elements by the covering of lumber on the outside. For many years, a caretaker's home stood on the east end of the bridge. Every time a train crossed the bridge, the caretaker was expected to inspect the tracks for any remnants of hot coals or soot that may have fallen from the train preventing a loss of the structure. Sometime around 1915, wooden trestles were added to the bridge to support the heavier cargo that engines began to carry. From this time until the 1940s, at least one train loaded with coal crossed the bridge daily. In addition, tourist trains, comprised of about a dozen passenger coaches, also used the bridge. Highbridge was a popular attraction for the nearby residents and tourists. Anyone young and old alike, daring enough to cross the 75-foot high structure, had to have their picture taken while standing on the tin roof that protected the bridge, including this family on top of Highbridge sometime in the 1930s. Consideration for Fishing Creek as the supply for water was not a new development. Records show that as early as 1898, George W. Hayes, consulting engineer, made an extensive report to the council about securing this site. Hayes's closing but prophetic statement is quite interesting, and I quote, "The more the question of the future water supply of Lebanon is considered, the more apparent it becomes that the present South Mountain system does not contain the promise and assurance of sufficient water for the new Lebanon of the future. If she is to become strong as an industrial center, she must look elsewhere for water." In July of 1944, council engaged consulting engineers Gannett, Fleming, Cordry, and Carpenter Incorporation of Harrisburg to draw up the necessary plans and specifications for this new project. Bonds in the amount of $1.5 million were sold at an interest rate of slightly less than 1% to finance this major project. The work was divided into 3 separate contracts: furnishing and installing the pipe, construction of a reservoir and dam, and construction of a control and treatment house. Construction began in early 1946. These views show the construction of the new dam spillway that was built under the old Schuylkill and Susquehanna Railroad Company's bridge. At a cost of $3 million, this new dam was completed by late summer of 1948. It impounded 310 million gallons of water and covered a surface area of about 55 acres. Its construction inundated the old Native American trail that passed through this gap between the portion of the Blue Mountains known as Second Mountain. Heavy rains in the fall of 1948 soon pushed the waters of the new reservoir over the concrete spillway. The construction of a control and treatment building located at the base of the dam for adding chlorine for disinfection and lime to raise the pH level was also included in the project. In addition, the building included an office, a flow meter, valves to shut off power, a diesel generator, and a lab for testing the quality of water. That was in this building. Due to safety reasons and its age, the old bridge of the Schuylkill and Susquehanna Railroad Company, by this time known as the Lebanon Tremont Division of the Reading Railroad, were dismantled in the summer of 1949. The old stone abutments of the long abandoned railroad remain near the spillway. The site would remain a popular destination for Sunday afternoon retreats, as seen by these photographs of the George W. Wren family as they posed for their pictures along the spillway and dam breast. The Wren family had owned and operated the nearby Twin Grove Park. This aerial view taken in the summer of 1968 shows the water supply and dam at Highbridge, Schuylkill County. And this area right here is the old Susquehanna Schuylkill Railroad bed right through here. Picks over on this side. The Lebanon Valley Consolidated Water Company's pumping station and filter plant, located along the Swatara Creek in West Jonestown, was built in 1910. Standing at 148 feet high, its stack, no doubt, served as a beacon for drivers and others who passed by Lebanon County's tallest structure. In May of 1917, the property was purchased and operated by the Bethlehem Steel Company. It supplied water to not only the Bethlehem Steel Company's main plant in the city of Lebanon, but to the Indiantown Gap Military Reservation, Lebanon's independent borough, and the Cleona area. The Lebanon Water Authority purchased the property and water rights in 1952. Here is the original intake and filter plant along the Swatara Creek. And here is the future site of a new intake pump station located along the Swatara Creek and a short distance from the former Lebanon Valley Consolidated Water Company's pumping station and filter plant. A new intake pump station was built in 1972, along with the new water treatment plant located about 3 miles south. This new supply of water would prove to be satisfactory for a relative short period of time. With the severe drought conditions in the summer of 1980 and the increasing number of municipalities tapping into the system, studies would be made for the possible construction of another dam. Despite a number of obstacles, hopes of constructing a 125-foot concrete dam downstream from the existing dam became a reality in June of 1991. Ethel Seacrest, widow of Christian E. Seacrest, assisted local and state officials to break ground for the new dam on Wednesday, June 19, 1991. Mr. Seacrest, for whom the new dam and reservoir would be named for, had been a 50-year employee of the City of Lebanon's Water Authority. Included in preparing the site, the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission required the old Swatara furnace stack to be stabilized due to the increased number of heavy vehicles and equipment being moved near the site. The new dam had to be anchored to solid bedrock. Countless loads of stone was delivered. In addition, a concrete plant was assembled on site, as well as a conveyor system to deliver the concrete. The roller compacted concrete began in April of 1992. Occasional heavy rains temporarily halted production. Located about 400 feet downstream from the Highbridge Dam, the new Christian E. Seacrest Dam was the first of its kind. For 100 consecutive days, concrete was poured and rolled on site. It was to become Pennsylvania's first roller compacted concrete dam. The former Highbridge Dam was an earthen and poured concrete structure. Here's an aerial view of the construction showing some progress of the new dam. And here you can see the original Highbridge Dam right here. And here's the new one going up, of course. This here is the old railroad bed and continues over on this side. Water slowly collected behind the earthen wall of the former dam until it flowed into the dam breast and spillway, flooding a 400-foot long section of creek bed before backing up behind the higher wall of the new facility. Right there. The old dam breast and block wall monitoring station were not removed. Right there. Today it remains submerged in about 30 feet of water. The new dam is bigger in every way than the 45-year-old Highbridge Dam it replaced. A comparison of the two dams is as follows. With a height of 131 feet and a length of 700 feet, it is 66 feet higher and 100 feet longer than Highbridge. And with a volume of 1.18 billion gallons, it impounds 3 times more water than Highbridge. With the completion of the new Christian E. Seacrest Dam in 1993, the Daily News stated that residents served by the Lebanon City Water Authority will easily weather a severe drought lasting several months. However, during the summers of 1997 and 1999, drought conditions prevailed longer than expected, and conditions were beginning to look quite severe. Today, the Seacrest Dam and Swatara Creek supply water to the City of Lebanon, Cornwall Borough, the Village of Fredericksburg, West Lebanon Township, and the Pennsylvania American Water Company. Lebanon Reservoir, as it is sometimes labeled on maps, has a surface area of about 106 acres and drains in an area of about 15 square miles. Evening Branch, Fishing Creek, and other unnamed tributaries make up the impounded waters. The excess water from the reservoir flows downstream into Mill Creek before joining into the Swatara Creek. Today, nearly 44,000 acres of Pennsylvania state game lands encompass the Lebanon Reservoir in Pine Grove Township, Schuylkill County. The lower left area identifies the proposed but never built dam along the Swatower Creek watershed project. The demise of the pumping station in Lancaster County began in 1948. The building was locked, grass was mowed, trash was removed regularly, and a caretaker was retained for a few dollars a month, plus a rent-free 4-room house. Weathered mortar loosened by bolts of lightning attracted to its lightning arrestor had allowed bricks to drop off the top course of the stack and into the boiler room. This began to damage the roof of the building as well as pose a hazard to visitors. The 50-foot stack was leveled and capped. The tidy caretaker's house adjacent to the pumping station was in need of maintenance. The question arose whether or not to repair or demolish the structure. The pump house still contained valuable equipment, so caretaker was needed at the site to prevent theft or vandalism. Modest roof repairs were made to the residents. Discussions began concerning the future of the pumping station itself. The roof needed attention and was costing $600 a month to lease utility-owned standby power transformers. City Council thought it should be abandoned. By the early 1960s, the question of abandoning Hammer Creek surfaced again. In early 1964, all salvageable machinery and switchgear was removed and sold. Transformers were disconnected and removed by the power company. The caretaker's home was sealed and abandoned. Nature quickly began to close in on the remaining structures. Tropical Storm Agnes in 1972 demolished the house. Shortly after, the Pennsylvania Game Commission gained title to land in August of 1979. The old sandstone pumping station was demolished a year later. All that remains today is a small concrete pad. Remnants of the sluice gates that controlled the flow of streams that fed into the dam can also be found hidden among the underbrush. And until a few years ago, the dam breast and sluice gates located along Hammer Creek remained. It too has since been destroyed. In 1979, the Pennsylvania Game Commission purchased 4,537 acres of wooded land in Lebanon and Lancaster counties. This land included the former city supply dams at Rexmont and the old pumping station off Route 322. It is known as State Game Lands 156. The city of Lebanon retained the water rights and all spillway obligations to the South Mountain water supply, shown right here, but sold off the former caretaker's home, located here, located west of the dams. The location of the old pumping station caretaker's home at Hammer Creek and Poplar Run, Elizabeth Township, Lancaster County is identified at the position of this third arrow. On Sunday, February 13, 2000, the public was greeted with the news that the Pennsylvania Game Commission had applied for a permit to breach Dam Number 1 at Rexmont. In November of the previous year, officials of the Department of Environmental Protection found the dam to be unsafe. For years, cracks in the concrete spillway that leads away from the lower dam have been allowed to seep beneath the spillway, slowly eroding the earth below. DEP officials ruled the dam to be unsafe and high hazard. Once breached, wetland growth would be encouraged and a wildlife preserve would be developed. 2 days after the midwinter breaking news, the City of Lebanon's Water Authority relinquished all rights to the watershed. The removal of the structure would not only result in the loss of a unique recreation area, but concerns for the nearby Horse Mill Pond became another issue. The overflow from the dam slowly winds to the east, filling the old mill pond before flowing southward to the other side of the South Mountain. Amos and June Wanger, owners of the historic landmark, feared the loss of the dam would surely result in the loss of the old mill pond. The old mill pond was used by residents of the Veterans Administration Hospital as a site to fish. The Rexmont Dam had become one of 26 other dams deemed unsafe and a high hazard throughout the Commonwealth. For several years, the Game Commission received numerous citations concerning the safety of the dam from the Army Corps of Engineers, but were largely ignored. In response to the DEP's notice, the Game Commission stated that it would only cost $100,000 to breach the dam rather than to restore them at $1 million. Shortly after the announcement of the breaching of the dam, a grassroots organization led by Robert Funk led to support the century-old and aging structures. Friends of the Rexmont dams quickly circulated petitions to try and save the dam and forward them to the proper officials. Despite the backing from the county commissioners, the support of various municipalities, a possible land swap, and a state-funded feasibility study, the dam would be breached by September of 2001. Prior to its breaching, the Pennsylvania Game Commission utilized the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission to remove and relocate some of the fish that had been located within the former water supply. They had stocked it yearly. Efforts from the Friends of the Rexmont Dams organization were quickly put in place to try and save the remaining upper dam. But by early fall of the next year, dam number 2 followed the fate as its predecessor. Shortly after the breaching of the dams, the DEP drew fire from the Lebanon County Commissioners. The county officials criticized the draining of the watershed during a summer drought. The DEP had demanded citizens to save water during this drought, but yet they deemed it necessary to drain millions of gallons of water from dam number 2. The county commissioners were unsure if draining the dam violated the emergency drought proclamation, but as Commissioner William Carpenter stated, it's a violation of common sense. DEP officials claimed they had not violated the governor's drought emergency by emptying the dam. Their published statement read as follows: drought regulations don't interfere with unsafe dams, thus ending the final chapter in the history of the old supply dams. Today, you won't find lovers strolling along the once peaceful waters, nor will you see local governing officials gathering to inspect or survey the site. Nor will you see people swimming or strolling around the cool waters, or skaters gliding and falling on its once frozen waters. Of course, you won't be able to venture out onto the walkway of the valve house to drop stones below. What you will find is the old supply and aerator pipe standing idle just slightly beyond the breach in dam number 2's breast and peeking above the tall grasses that have quickly reclaimed the area. And you'll hear the gentle waters of the Hammer Creek flowing out of the mountainside and northward through the site that once was the water supplies for the industrial city of Lebanon. At the site of the old pumping station, once located along Route 322, although obscured by nature, a few remaining structures from its early days are hidden among the trees and underbrush. The flowing waters of Poplar Run and Hammer Creek occasionally flood the area. And many people often can be seen hiking through the trails that surround the former site of the old pumping station. In closing, expect the release of a new publication after 100+ years about the history of Lebanon's water and sewer systems. This publication, produced by the City of Lebanon Authority, covers quite a bit more than this evening's program. The book will be available for purchase through the Lebanon Water Authority, as well as the Lebanon County Historical Society and the Cornwall Iron Furnace gift shops. Please feel free to contact me for any corrections, additions, stories you would need to tell me. I can be reached at the information posted on this slide. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mike. We have had a couple of questions come through.
Okay, John Beers is also available. So John, if you are able to answer something, please jump in.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. So, first question, and it is from Michael Schroeder, and he asks, what can you tell us about the laborers who built that earliest dam, the 1871 to 1872 dam? Do you have an idea of how many there were, the ethnicities, and really how it was done? Was it done by hand or was it done by steam shovels?
That's a very good question. John, of course, jump in if you could provide additional information. As far as I know, the workers were of people from the area, and they lived in shacks that were built along the South Mountain. And as far as I know, it was all done by hand.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I don't have any history on the labor practices that were used back in those days. I don't know if it's in any records or not. I have not stumbled across it.
I remember coming across a a news story about a gentleman that was murdered who was one of these workers. They were living in the shacks. That's how I became aware of the shacks that were built for the workers.
Yeah, I can also tell you, Mike, that I had seen when I worked at Landis Valley in the collection, there were all these scoops that you could go ahead and put behind teams of horses. And
Yes.
that's how a lot of like mill ponds and things like that were dug. So I assume for that time period, they probably would have done a little bit of the same thing. So
Sure.
a combination
On the roads.
and also horsepower.
Yep.
All right, I have another question here. This one is from Jared Blauk. Jared writes, very impressive wealth of knowledge and fascinating account of historical events and locations. I have heard that the direction of the water may have defied gravity and was said to have flowed uphill in some areas of Rexmont near the dam. Some factors could have been due to natural elevation changes, runoff, water table depth, or affected by the mill and the tail races. Have you heard this suburban legend, and is it true?
I have not heard of it before. John, have you?
No, I've never run across that situation. I have nothing on that one either.
No.
Okay.
Look at that.
All right, so there's something for us to look into. We'll have to ask Jared where he heard that. Question here from Judith, and she wanted to ask if you could add more about adding fluoride to the water.
John.
Yeah, that one I can take. Fluoride wasn't added until the new water plant was built in south of Jonestown in 1972. Fluoride was something new that came out in the 1950s and 60s, added to community water systems. And I don't have the exact information about that, but it was, I think, voted on by somebody. I'm not sure if it was city council or who voted on it at the time to add fluoride to the Lebanon water supply at the new water treatment plant. And we still add fluoride today. It's a permit requirement to add fluoride. And we've had some recent discussions about maybe stop adding fluoride, since everybody seems to be able to get fluoride from other sources such as your toothpaste and so forth. But to take out fluoride from being added to the water would be a permit modification that we have not pursued yet.
All right. We also had a question here asking about person had missed the beginning of the talk and wanted to know about where the water went from the Hammer Creek down on where 322 that had gone into the Rexmont dams. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah, that was pumped to the number 2 dam. That was that standpipe.
Okay. All right. That's just wanted to make sure that got out there for everyone. Question here from Brian. Do you have any pictures of the laying of the pipe from Highbridge to Lebanon? And he also inquired about the size of the pipe and if it was one or was it multiple pipes?
If you buy that book that we just published, we got some really nice pictures of that pipeline being laid from Highbridge all the way into the city. That went down through the gap in between the mountain ranges where Route 81 cuts through the mountains. And from there on south, it cuts between Jonestown and Fredericksburg in the farm field area, and then comes all the way into the Coleman Park area of Maple Street. And that's where that line ties into the city water system. It's a 30-inch cast iron pipeline that is still in use today. It was intercepted just south of Jonestown, and that's where we built the water treatment plant. So water from Highbridge, or now the Seacrest Dam, still flows through that 30-inch pipe to the water treatment plant. And then once it's treated at the treatment plant, it continues on in the 30-inch pipe all the way into the city at Coleman's Park. So that's still in use today, and it's well over 80 years old now.
All right, well, thank you. Question here from Sue. What specifically is the Rexmont stub?
I never heard of that before.
Okay.
Never heard of it, ever.
Okay.
I'm stumped on the stub too.
All right. So we'll have to ask Sue where she heard that one. That might have been something came from her family.
And I'm a near lifelong resident of Rexmont and have never heard of that.
Okay.
And I'm a nosy neighbor. I ask questions.
All right. Oh, where we do? We have a couple more here. Growing up in East Poplar Street in the 1950s and 60s, we would get heavy spring flooding on East Elm Street. Did any of this flooding come from the Rexmont reservoirs?
I can handle that. No, I'm going to say no. That water that comes into East Poplar Street is the drainage way that goes under Klein Avenue. It starts up in the area near Stone Barn Furniture. It's a pretty dry drainage area. There's no running water except for during flooding conditions. So it does not come from the Rexmont dams. The Rexmont dams actually feed the watershed that went around to the Hammer Creek pump station. It was a discharge from the Rexmont dams, actually fed, recirculated down to the Hammer Creek pump stations. It got pumped back up to Rexmont Dam number 2. In Mike's presentation tonight, he talked about flooding near what is today the Bluebird Inn from the Rexmont dams. I've always been confused by that statement because the Rexmont Dam discharge wraps around the mountains and heads south. It doesn't head north towards the city. But there are drainage areas from the Rexmont area that do head north, and some of that is a tributary then eventually into Elm Street. But that's further west from the Rexmont dams. It's the Rexmont Dam's discharge actually heads south towards Lancaster.
All right, and I think this one will be our final question, and I think this one is more towards you, John. Is there any information about lead pipes in the Lebanon water supply?
We don't have any lead pipes. There might be a few joints in service lines into people's homes that have some lead in them. And we are trying to document all those service lines that might have lead in them. Lead was no longer used after around the 1930s. So what we did was looked at all of our service lines that were dated older than 1940 and identified them, and just to see if they were documented as being replaced at some time in the past 70 or 80 years. If not, we're going to address those with those property owners and see if we can get them replaced for them. Our lead and copper testing that we've been doing on the water supply has been very, very good. We feel that our water is not aggressive like the things you've heard out in Michigan that are affecting lead in the supplies out there. It is not actually lead in water. It's lead that is in the pipe fixtures, which could be in the service line or even in the fixtures in their home. And if the water is too aggressive, probably meaning it's acidic or has low alkalinity in it, it could leach out the particles of lead and get into your water. So we have a very high pH water. It's not aggressive water at all. So we have been very successful on getting good results of having no lead and copper issues in our drinking water supply to people's homes.
Okay, well, thank you for that, John. So that, I think we'll go ahead and conclude the questions. Mike, do you have any final thoughts?
No, thank you, John, for your added information. It's always appreciated.
Well, let me say this to the people who are still listening. Mike did an excellent job on putting all this information together tonight. I listened to it intently. He had all his facts correct, and I appreciate what Mike has done here. He's really branched out in some really interesting side stories to the water supply in Lebanon. Has made a very interesting slide presentation here that you guys enjoyed tonight.
Thank you, John.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John.
Thanks,
Let me
guys.
add that the publication that will be coming out shortly, it's very well done. Lots of wonderful photographs.
All right. Well, thank you. So I'll go ahead and I'll kind of close things up here this evening. So thank you very much for joining us for this lecture. I especially want to thank Mike Trump for his presentation and for Kathy Donaldson for helping to organize our virtual talk. And I also want to thank John Beers for joining us as well for his extra commentary talking about the City of Lebanon's water supply. I also want to thank the Friends of the Cornwall Iron Furnace who sponsored this program. And if you or your business would like to sponsor a future lecture, please contact the site for further information. And of course, donations are always gladly accepted. So please join us for our next lecture on Tuesday, December 14th, which will be a talk about the railroads of Cornwall, which will be by Mark Kane. And also, we will be having an in-person event on December 4th, which is a Christmas open house. And look for further information on that on our website in the coming weeks, as well as our Facebook site. And just a reminder that the museum is now open Friday through Sunday. So please check our website for details and for detailed tour information. So thank you everyone for attending, and please stay safe and good night.